The air was thick with smoke, and the sound of distant explosions echoed across the small village. In the middle of the chaos, a young woman cradled her infant daughter against her chest, her eyes darting toward the horizon where soldiers advanced. She knew she had little time. The war had already taken everything: her home, her husband, her safety, and now it was threatening to take her daughter too. Neighbors shouted, children screamed, and families scattered in desperation. In that moment, the mother's heart shattered, for she knew what she had to do. She whispered into her baby's ear, her voice trembling, "I will love you forever, no matter where life takes you." With tears blurring her vision, she placed the little girl in the arms of a humanitarian worker evacuating orphans from the war zone. The child, too young to understand, let out a cry that was swallowed by the noise of collapsing buildings. The mother turned away, every step heavy as though she was walking through quicksand. It was the hardest decision of her life, but it was the only way to ensure her daughter might live. The girl was taken across borders, passing through refugee camps and endless lines of frightened families. Days turned into weeks and weeks into months, until eventually she was flown to a new country. Far from the war, far from the destruction, far from the woman who had risked everything. In her new homeland, she was greeted by a couple who had longed for a child of their own. They saw the fragile little girl, with her dark eyes wide with fear, and instantly their hearts wrapped around her. They named her Elena. To them, she was not a child of tragedy, but a miracle. For Elena, the early years were filled with safety, warmth, and the gentle rhythm of family life. But even as she learned new words, new customs, and new lullabies, there was something in her heart she could not quite name. Sometimes she would wake in the middle of the night, crying without reason, as if some invisible memory haunted her. Her adoptive parents loved her fiercely, doing everything they could to make her feel at home. Yet, behind the smiles and bedtime stories, Elena carried questions she was too young to ask. Who had held her before she was placed in the arms of strangers? Why did she feel as though a piece of her belonged somewhere else? The story of Elena's life had only just begun, but already it carried the weight of sacrifice, survival, and a mystery waiting to be uncovered. But as she grew older, that mystery would not remain buried. What secrets about her past would Elena discover as she grew up? If this story is already touching your heart, leave a comment below. What would you do if you found out your life began in such a way? Don't forget to like and subscribe to follow the rest of Elena's journey. Elena grew up in a quiet suburban neighborhood, a world away from the destruction she had been born into. By the time she turned 10, she was already fluent in her adoptive parents' language, excelling at school and making friends easily. To anyone who looked at her from the outside, she was simply a happy child with a bright future. Yet deep down, Elena always sensed a small, unspoken distance between herself and her world. It wasn't caused by her parents' love. They adored her, never once letting her feel like anything less than their daughter. But there were questions that lingered in her mind, questions she couldn't silence. At family gatherings, she would hear stories of her parents' ancestry, of great-grandparents, family heirlooms, and traditions passed down through generations. Elena would smile politely, but inside she felt the sting of not knowing her own roots. She had no family tree to trace, no history to cling to. The only history she carried was a single line on a piece of paper, found in a war zone, adopted through humanitarian evacuation. As she entered her teenage years, the curiosity grew stronger. Small fragments of memory surfaced, flashes of a woman's face blurred by tears, the muffled sound of explosions, the strange rhythm of a lullaby in a language she no longer spoke. At times, Elena wondered if these were real memories, or just dreams pieced together from stories she had overheard. Her adoptive parents, Thomas and Maria, noticed her restlessness. One evening, as they sat together at the kitchen table, Maria reached across and held Elena's hand. "You know, sweetheart," she said softly, "if you ever want to know more about where you came from, we'll help you. We've always wanted you to feel whole, no matter what that means." Elena's heart swelled with gratitude. She had always feared that asking about her past would hurt her parents, as if her longing for answers meant she was ungrateful. But their openness gave her strength. Still, the road to the truth would not be easy. Records were scarce. The war had destroyed hospitals, orphanages, and entire towns. Many children like Elena had been displaced and their identities were lost in the chaos. Every attempt to find information felt like reaching into smoke, grasping, but holding nothing. And yet Elena couldn't let it go. She felt a pull she couldn't explain, a voice inside whispering that someone, somewhere, was waiting for her. At school, when her friends spoke about their grandparents' recipes or family traditions, Elena would smile. But later she'd sit alone in her room and whisper to herself, who was she? Did she ever think of me? She didn't know it yet, but the answers she longed for were still out there, buried beneath the ashes of a war, waiting for the day she would come looking. Elena's longing for the truth was only growing stronger. But where could she possibly begin in a world that had erased the traces of her past? By the time Elena turned 22, her longing had grown into determination. She was now a university student, studying international relations, a choice influenced, perhaps unconsciously, by her own mysterious past. Surrounded by classmates who proudly carried their cultural identities, she felt the emptiness of not knowing hers. One evening, while working late in the library, she came across an article about children evacuated from war zones in the early 90s. Her pulse quickened as she recognized the description: humanitarian flights, orphaned children, and chaotic records. For the first time, she realized she wasn't alone. There were others like her, scattered across the globe, living lives built on the ashes of conflict. That night, Elena made a decision. She would return to the country of her birth. Thomas and Maria were hesitant at first. They had always known this day might come, but letting go, even temporarily, was harder than they imagined. "Are you sure you're ready for what you might find?" Thomas asked gently. Elena nodded, her eyes unwavering. "I've spent my whole life wondering. Even if the answers are painful, I need to know." With their blessing, she began her journey. The trip was not easy. The country still bore scars of its violent past. Bombed-out buildings, displaced families, and a fragile peace that seemed to hold together by threads. Elena walked streets she had never known, yet somehow they felt eerily familiar. She visited local archives, speaking with aid workers and community elders. Most records had been destroyed. Still, a few names surfaced, whispered through faded documents, orphan lists, refugee camps, and evacuation manifests. Her search led her to a small village on the outskirts of the capital, where she met an elderly woman who had lived through the war. The woman listened as Elena explained her story, tears brimming in her eyes. Finally, the woman placed a trembling hand on Elena's shoulder and whispered, "I remember a young mother. She refused to leave until she found someone to carry her baby to safety. She said it was the only way to save her child." Elena's chest tightened. Could this have been her mother? The trail was faint, fragile as glass. Every new lead seemed to break under the weight of time and tragedy. But Elena pressed on, feeling closer than ever to the truth. For the first time in her life, she felt she was walking a path laid out for her long ago, one paved with sacrifice. And then, one afternoon, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in hues of orange, Elena received a message that changed everything. A local volunteer had found someone who might know her family's story, someone who had been there the day she was taken away. Elena's heart pounded as she prepared to meet them. She was closer than ever to the truth, but she had no idea that what awaited her would be both beautiful and heartbreaking. Who was this person, and what truth would they reveal about the family Elena had lost? The meeting was arranged in a modest cafe near the outskirts of the city. Elena sat nervously at a wooden table, her hands wrapped tightly around a cup of tea that had long gone cold. She kept glancing at the door, her heart thundering inside her chest. Finally, the door creaked open, and an older man stepped inside. His face was weathered, his eyes carrying the weight of memories too heavy for one lifetime. When he spotted Elena, he froze for a moment, his lips parting as if he were staring at a ghost. Slowly, he walked toward her. "You look just like her," he whispered as he sat down. Elena leaned forward, her breath caught in her throat. "Like who?" The man's eyes shimmered with tears. "Your mother." Her heart skipped a beat. For years she had imagined this moment, Yet hearing those words felt surreal. She clutched the edge of the table, afraid that if she let go, reality would shatter into pieces. The man introduced himself as Yusuf, a neighbor from her mother's village. He had known her family before the war tore everything apart. With trembling hands, he pulled out a faded photograph from his jacket pocket. A young woman, smiling faintly, holding a baby in her arms. Elena's vision blurred with tears. The baby in the picture was unmistakably her. Yusuf's voice broke as he told the story. Her mother, Layla, had been widowed early in the war. When the fighting reached their village, she refused to flee without finding a way to save her daughter. Resources were scarce, food had vanished, and danger closed in from every direction. Layla had walked for days through dangerous terrain until she found humanitarian workers evacuating children. She begged them to take you, Yusuf explained, his voice raw. She knew she might never see you again, but she believed it was the only way you would live. She kissed you, held you one last time, and placed you in their arms. Then she turned back to the village. Elena's tears fell freely now, her chest aching with both gratitude and grief. What happened to her? She asked in a trembling voice. Yusuf hesitated, his silence louder than words. Finally, he said, "She did not survive the war, but she spoke of you until her last breath. She said her daughter was her greatest love, her greatest hope, that even if she never saw you again, she would live on through you." The weight of his words crushed Elena, yet at the same time, they lifted her. She had always wondered if she had been abandoned. Now she knew the truth. She had not been abandoned at all. She had been saved, through the greatest sacrifice a mother could make. Through tears, Elena whispered, "She gave me everything." Yusuf reached across the table, covering her hand with his. "And now, you must live in a way that honors her." That is what she would have wanted. For the first time in her life, Elena felt both whole and broken at once. She had lost her mother forever, but she had gained the truth. And that truth would change everything. How would Elena carry this truth into the rest of her life? And what final lesson would she take from her mother's sacrifice? Elena walked out of the cafe with Yusuf's words echoing in her mind. The streets around her were busy, filled with vendors, children, and the hum of daily life. Yet for her, the world felt suspended in silence. She carried the photograph of her mother pressed tightly against her chest, as if holding it could bring her closer to the woman who had given everything for her. That night, she returned to her hotel room and stared at her reflection in the mirror. For the first time, she didn't just see Elena, the adopted daughter of Thomas and Maria. She saw Layla's child, the daughter of a woman who had faced war and loss but chosen love above all else. Tears streamed down her cheeks, but they were no longer just tears of grief. They were tears of understanding. Back home, Thomas and Maria welcomed her with open arms, their relief overwhelming. She shared the story with them, showing the photograph. Maria placed a gentle hand over Elena's and whispered, "You were never abandoned. You were given a chance at life because your mother loved you enough to let go." In the weeks that followed, Elena began to write about her journey. She started a journal, then a blog, and eventually spoke at conferences about the silent sacrifices made during wars, especially by parents who had no choice but to give up their children. Her voice resonated deeply, inspiring others who carried similar questions about their own beginnings. But the most profound change was within Elena herself. For years, she had felt a void, a missing piece of her identity. Now she carried her mother's love as part of her, woven into her very being. She had learned that family was not defined solely by blood or proximity. It was defined by sacrifice, by courage, and above all, by love. On the anniversary of her discovery, Elena returned to her mother's village. She lit a candle near the remnants of the old houses, whispering into the wind, "Thank you. I will live for you." The flame flickered gently as if answering back. As she stood there, Elena realized her mother had given her not just life, but a mission to carry forward a story of hope, even in the shadow of war. And in that moment, Elena felt at peace. She had found not only her past, but also her purpose. Love is the most powerful legacy a parent can give. Even when circumstances tear families apart, the sacrifice made out of love can echo across time. shaping lives in ways that endure far beyond tragedy. What do you think about Layla's sacrifice for her daughter? Could you imagine having to make such a heartbreaking choice? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if Elena's story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video so more people can hear how powerful love can truly be.